Suicide, then forgiveness. Shattering stigma, igniting hope. I'm Elaine Lindsay, and my mission is to end the silence, the stigma, and the shame surrounding suicide, ideation, and mental health. We talk about the hard stuff, because asking for help should be as easy as ordering a coffee. Here, we share real stories from those who've lost someone, survived an attempt, live with ideation, or battle mental health challenges. Why? Because sharing your burden can lighten the load. Please note, Suicide Then Forgiveness, the podcast, is for education only. Some of the subject matter could be triggering for those who are either grieving or having mental health problems. If you're in North America, you can text 988 for immediate support. And if you're elsewhere, please reach out to your local suicide hotline or mental health service. You matter. My aim is to normalize the conversation so you feel safe enough to speak up and ask for help. So now, let's start the show. I'm so glad to be back. I met my next guest back in 2011 in Google Plus, actually. He was just starting out as a podcaster, and I noted even then he was dedicated, incredibly kind, and in all honesty, to this day, he's still one of the most genuine good guys you could ever hope to meet. I'm honored to bring you John-Lee Dumas, a renowned entrepreneur and podcaster, best known for his show, Entrepreneurs on Fire. Before his success in the podcasting world, Dumas served in the U.S. Army for approximately 8 years, including a 13-month deployment in Iraq as an armor platoon leader. John graduated from Providence College in 2002, and he was commissioned as an officer in the Army. His commissioning class was actually the first to enter service following the events of September 11th, 2001. Initially, he wanted to join the Army Corps of Engineers, but Dumas' assignment shifted to armor due to administrative disruptions caused by the 9/11 attacks. In 2003, John deployed to Iraq, leading a tank platoon of 16 men through areas such as Ramadi, Habanaya, sorry if I've pronounced those wrong, reflecting on his military experience. Through areas such as Ramadi and Habanaya, reflecting on his military experience, John has highlighted the importance of making timely decisions, emphasizing that a good decision now is better than a great decision later. He also underscores the value of humility and learning from experienced team members, noting his reliance on his platoon sergeant's expertise during his early days as a leader. These leadership lessons from his military service have profoundly influenced John's entrepreneurial journey, shaping his approach to business and mentorship. And I was lucky enough to reconnect with John in January at PodFest in Florida. And he was gracious enough to agree to come on the podcast. So without further ado, let me introduce you to John-Lee Dumas. John, I talked about the fact that you were commissioned, I believe, after 2002, and yours was the first class to enter service following the events of September 11th, I believe,
That is true.
2001.
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
You wanted to be Army Corps of Engineers, but because of the disruptions to do with the 9/11 attacks, you actually shifted to armor?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting, a quick story that I'll tell you just because I think it really
Please.
reminds us of how traumatizing that day was. But in the summer of 2001, I was going into my senior year, so we do what's called 6 weeks of advance camp, and that's training up in Washington, specifically Fort Irwin, Washington State, a little south of Tacoma, and it was a really great experience. I actually performed very well. I became what's called a top 4% cadet. And the reason why that's relevant is because it gave me the choice to choose what branch I wanted to get into. And so I chose engineers. And I thought I was all wrapped up with that. And then, of course, 9/11 happens and it was a terrible experience overall. But then we get called in the week after, and our commander says to us, like, hey, this is going to sound pretty crazy, but it's true. The part of the Pentagon that got hit by the plane was the ROTC departments. And all of the records, which by the way were all handwritten at the time, it wasn't even
Oh,
computerized. So we had sent in like paper copies of that, and that's how they processed it back then. So there's no backups. They said it just got vaporized, like, it just completely, it was a total loss. So what they were doing now was they were going to essentially randomly assign everybody because they just didn't have time to go back and do this because they had other things to worry about, of course, post 9/11. So that was the reason I got randomly assigned armor, and I survived, so I guess I can say that things could have been worse, but I'll tell you, it was a tough road.
my I can only imagine. You led a tank platoon during a 13-month deployment in Iraq. My father did 13 months in Aden in Yemen, and that was his first deployment back
Wow.
in 1953. Things have changed a little. What impact did that responsibility and the high stress environment have on your own mental well being, both during and after service?
During, you're locked in because there's no alternative. You either just execute and perform your mission, or you're putting yourself and even more importantly, your soldiers at risk. So you just go into this weird headspace of I'm just a soldier and I'm going to follow orders and I'm going to give orders and I'm going to execute the mission. Now, there's a lot of things that are going on under the scene, like below the surface at that point as well. And for me, I felt like the first few years out of the army when I redeployed back to the States and then I reintegrated and I transitioned out of the military and reintegrated into the civilian world, I was like, man, I must have dodged a bullet. Like both figuratively, because I dodged some bullets in Iraq, but both figuratively and literally, I dodged a bullet emotionally because I felt like I was not dealing with any PTSD that I was hearing was so common. And I felt very fortunate about that. Now, fast forward just about a year, I enroll into law school. And law school is a very high stress environment. And that high stress environment, like, just popped a screw in my brain that I didn't even know was loose. And I experienced severe PTSD, like severe trauma. I was depressed. I was sad. Like, for me, the feeling was mostly just like, I just don't care about anything, and that's actually a terrifying feeling because, like, when you care about stuff a lot, like, I'm from New England, so I used to watch the New England Patriots football, and I would live or die by the touchdowns, the wins, the losses, like, it would make my day or ruin my day, but I would be watching them on I'd be like, "Who cares?" Like, I have no emotion about this, and that was my first tip off of, "Whoa, like, something's wrong." And so it took therapy, it took medication, it took time to get over the PTSD, but I was able to do it. It did cause me to drop out of law school. I just couldn't take it emotionally. And I went on a 4-month backpacking trip in India to just lose myself slash find myself. And I had a good time. I wouldn't say I had any incredible emotional experiences there. It was just a good trip overall, but nothing crazy. And I'd say it wasn't really until my early 30s that I really felt like I was able to shrug it off for the most part. It'll always be with me on some level. I still think of the 4 soldiers that were in my platoon of the 16, so 25%, that gave the ultimate sacrifice. That's always gonna be with me, and that's always gonna be part of the emotional trauma and baggage that I carry.
Absolutely. I call it the grief train. Once we board, we're there for life. We just sometimes get off at a stop and bring on a little more baggage.
It's a good analogy. Do we ever
Thank
drop
you.
off baggage?
Sadly, no. No, we
Ah,
don't.
it's too bad.
Now, one thing I'll say, like, you were in the Army for 8 years.
Yep, 4 active, 4 in the reserves.
Wow. And you have spoken, even in your entrepreneurial journey, about learning to lead by leaning into your platoon sergeant and making timely decisions under pressure. How do you think the military training prepares or doesn't prepare soldiers for the emotional and psychological toll of deployment?
One interesting thing that I learned as an officer, and this was, from my platoon sergeant, was that a good decision now is better than a great decision later. And that's a very important thing for entrepreneurs to absorb as well, because if you don't have that understanding in the military, you might die. Because if you're paralyzed and you're not making any decision, because you're trying to think of this great decision and it causes no decision right away, that is jeopardizing your life and your soldier's life. So listen, make the best decision you can right now and move forward. It might not be perfect, it might not be great, but a good decision now is better than a great decision later. And I took that into entrepreneurship because I see so many entrepreneurs and business owners, they're just paralyzed with trying to come up with the best decision, the best action, the perfect idea. And that never really exists. So they just stuck there. It's called like failure to launch. So for me, I never had that problem because I learned that in the military and I just make good decisions, really the best decisions that I can make with the information that I have at that time. And then I drive forward and I don't second guess it. And sometimes it's the wrong decision. And then I pivot, I adjust, I back up, make a change, and then I drive forward again. And for me, that's always allowed me to keep moving forward.
I think that's such an important point because being a military brat myself, I was around a lot of military people, and the onus is always on you. The onus is always on you to pick up, dust off, and continue. I come from Scotland and have half Irish background. So picking yourself up and just going, it's all we knew. You just didn't have an option. And I think that's really important because in the entrepreneurial world, we not just be paralyzed, but we can overthink and over research and overdo to the extent that we actually are stuck in place forever, which is really not useful. And something you talk about in the entrepreneurial world, which I think is important for veterans, anyone who's been trained for combat and high stakes decisions. You talk about shifting your minds to prioritize mental health and ask for help when needed.
You've got to do it. That's one reason why I say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, because those people have to be individuals that you know, that you like, that you trust, that will tell you when something's off with you and maybe can recommend a resource or a person that you can talk to, whether that be a therapist or fill in the blank. Like, you need that support group around you that you really do know and trust. It's such a critical part to not just every entrepreneurial journey, but to the human journey. And I think you know this, Elaine, that I end every one of my Entrepreneurs on Fire shows with that quote: "You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with," because frankly, it's true.
And I can say I absolutely know that because I was there for the first show.
That's crazy.
It's a very long time ago.
13 years.
Yeah. Wow. It's almost 14 now.
Crazy.
Wow. One thing that to me is very important because I have to say, as much as I heard you say it and other people say it, I started out life very differently in trying to go it alone and keep my head down, not let the family get hurt, not bring anybody in if something wasn't right. And I can now say that is absolutely the wrong way to do everything. No man or woman is an island. And it's so important that we learn that because when you're vulnerable, when you open up to others, it's when you are actually the strongest. And I think that's so incredibly important. Many returning service members carry invisible scars. And I know something about those too. What would you say to the civilians who want to support them, but really have no idea how to approach that topic of trauma or suicide risk in a respectful way?
So for me, it's one of those things where we're human beings. We love stories. There's a reason why history, broken up into two words, is his story, her story. Like we all have stories. And a lot of soldiers and military veterans, they just want to be heard. Like they want to be heard because if they're asked by somebody who they care about to be heard, then they feel like they're there, like that it's real, that they have that support. So a lot of civilians try to avoid those conversations and try to avoid maybe picking at that scab, so to speak, that they may envision is there. And by the way, some veterans may not want to talk about certain things and may not want to talk about anything. And that's totally their prerogative. But I can tell you that if you approach it in a respectful way of something like, hey, listen, you mean a lot to me. Like I care about you. I'd love to hear more about your story when you were in the military. Doesn't have to be everything, doesn't have to be a lot of things, but if there's something that you feel comfortable talking about or that you want to talk about, I'm here for you. I want to hear that. I want to listen to you. And then just respect what they say. If they say, "Hey, it's not something I like to talk about," listen, they're still gonna be thankful and grateful that you asked, because it means that you care. It means that you see them. And then some of them might be like, "I'm glad you asked. It really helps me to talk about this stuff, so let's go grab a coffee and I'll tell you some stories." That's one thing that veterans do. When veterans get together, man, we just get together and we just tell stories because it's fun and we resonate with it and it brings back the good times and the bad times, and misery loves company. We can talk about the misery that we had in different scenarios, and it's just better for everybody, and sometimes it's just good to talk about this stuff.
That's such a good point. And I think even being there with someone and offering to listen is wonderful. They don't want to say anything, just offer to stay and just be there. I say on this show all the time that when you share your burden, it lightens somewhat.
Whoa.
And I believe that that's why people tell their stories, because this is the one way you do lose a little of the baggage is when you share it among those that you're traveling with.
I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. I am so grateful that you agreed to come on the show. I am once again really thrilled that I met you when I did and that I have got to see you grow through the years and become a married man with a darling little boy and a
But
lovely
he's
wife. Oh, they were,
16 months old.
oh yeah. He's so cute. And I think it's just really important for people to know you can ask for help. It doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur on fire. It doesn't matter if you've been doing things for years. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the military because we lose 4 times as many men as we lose women.
Mm.
And that's because men were taught don't show it, don't do it, don't say it, just be stoic. Eh, Not a good way to be. And I think it's critically important for us to get the message through. So, what is one thing you can leave our audience with, John?
It's a quote I love from Albert Einstein, which is, "Try not to become a person of success, but rather a person of value." A lot of people are just chasing success and they're leaving behind the fact that they have real value to give. Like the value that you're giving here today, Elaine, give value to people. Like, how can you be of service, of value? And when I started thinking in that manner, everything changed for me. And I hope that lights the light bulb for some people watching here today. And I respect your hashtag say their name. So I just want to say Andrea, Holly, Brian, Peter, Margaret, Ken, Emma, you're not forgotten.
Thank you for that. I so appreciate you coming to join us. Everybody, you'll find all of John's information below the podcast, as per usual. This has been Suicide Zen Forgiveness. I'm Elaine Lindsay. And until we see you again next time, make the most of your today, every day. Thank you, John, so much.
Thank you for being here for another inspiring episode of Suicide Zen Forgiveness. We appreciate you tuning in. Please subscribe and download on your favorite service and check out SZF's YouTube channel or Facebook community. If you have the chance to leave a 5-star rating or review, it'd be greatly appreciated. Please refer this to a friend you know who may benefit from the hope and inspiration from our guests. Suicide Zen Forgiveness was brought to you by the following sponsors. Truel Social Media, the digital integration specialists. Let them get you rockin' page 1 in the search results. Canada's keynote humorist Judy Croon, motivational speaker, comedian, author, and stand-up coach at Second City. Judy has been involved for over a decade in the City Street Outreach Program in Toronto.
The ultimate podcasting pack. This is great for you if you're just starting your podcast or if you've been running it for a while. It's filled with tools, templates, and trainings for starting, growing, and monetizing your podcast. Get access to time-saving systems and strategies for accelerating your process at each step. Find new connections and collaborations in the uplifting podcasting community. I look forward to seeing you there.
Do you have a story to share? Do you know someone you think would be a great guest? Please go to szf42.com. And for our American listeners, that's szf42.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again.